They do it in their head, you see. They write it and then they go... timing instant...
Hello and welcome back to Quiet Riot, the show that brings you political chat on the weekly, making the complex simple and the simple compelling. With me, Naomi Smith.
And me, Alex Andreou. We bring together voices from the left, the right, and from the soft and gooey centre.
And I'm the producer in the corner as ever, Kenny Campbell, the crinkly rapper for the talkative Twix, that's thesp here.
Here at Quiet Riot, we keep on top of the goings on in Westminster and further afield, and we not so much bring you our views as work out our views with you.
And when things get really hit the fan, we like to give our listeners a divine little something extra with a Sunday school edition at weekends.
Plus, we are pragmatic activists, always giving you a call to action so you can shake off the armchair general accusation, roll up your sleeves and get stuck into making the world a better place.
So let's turn up the dialogue, turn down the heat, and start a quiet riot. Hello and welcome back to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. On today's show, what else but a recap of the general election campaign so far as we head into the final fortnight.
Plus, what could Sunak have done differently? Is there an alternate reality in which Sunak could have saved the Tory party?
And we are joined by two brilliant guests this week. First up is Henry Morris, author of The Tories, A Tragedy, available now on pre-order. Welcome, Henry.
Good afternoon.
Henry, in an age where political parties hire vetting firms that don't vet, where Tory prime ministers make gaffe after unforced gaffe, is political parody impossible?
I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's increasingly difficult in the current climate. But the art to good parody is to be as realistic as possible. So hitting the notes that they're currently making with their mishaps and incompetencies and then chucking a joke in at the end is the trick.
And next up is Jim Blagden, Associate Director at More in Common. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
You have asked voters some eye-catching questions. Sunak beats Starmer hands down at most likely to get up in the morning after the first alarm. I can kind of see that. I can sort of see him waking up before the first alarm, actually. Just bolting upright 30 seconds before. So Sunak also scored more highly in winning at Monopoly, but those percentages were reversed when the question was most likely to let their child win at Monopoly. But the most eye-catching bit for me was that Starmer won comfortably at both giving tech support to a relative and fixing the Wi-Fi. What happened to Sunak's tech bro image? It was all we heard about for 2 years.
Yeah, this is peak vibes-based politics.
We love it. You did biscuits as well. We'll talk about that maybe later.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's fascinating. One of my favourite stats from that polling actually was kind of under the surface a little bit. What we kind of see maybe the sort of tech bro Zoomer vibes come through a bit for Sunak is among under 25-year-olds. He had quite a strong lead over Starmer on playing Fortnite.
Oh, right.
Which isn't perhaps what you'd ideally want. You want to be like kind of competency-based, fixing the Wi-Fi, helping your kids win board games. But there is a glimpse of that, maybe a little bit.
That's funny.
I just love the idea that, this man has spent the last 2 years sort of organising big tech conferences, and people go, if your Wi-Fi was broken, who would you trust to fix it? And they go, yeah, not that.
Wasn't the Wi-Fi dodgy at the Elon Musk Sunak head-to-head though? Wasn't that
was
what
a little bit, yeah, that's true.
I love the Monopoly one and him winning at it though, and not letting his kids win. Because have you seen the meme of his face with Saving Private Equity on the Saving Private Ryan poster? It's absolutely hilarious.
The best one is Leaving Private Ryan.
I think the most revealing stat of that round of polling was, who do you think makes a better cup of tea? That was the biggest margin by which Starmer won any of those questions. But I just saw that and I thought, God, you're screwed. Like, this is the acid test for the election. Like, who would you trust with your cuppa?
It is that time of the week again.
Oh, God.
Start your stop clock. Are we going to manage to do the news in 60 seconds.
Alex, we're looking at you.
No, she's the one who cooked it up last
I
week,
did.
and then you took all of them out in the edit. Don't think I didn't notice that.
In 3, 2, 1.
Lots of political manifestos were unveiled, and you can find them all in your nearest library's fiction section.
The world's biggest beer, brawling and bratwurst festival got underway in Germany, and some kickball happened there too.
Nigel Farage's experiment with telling the truth was a qualified success, as he told voters, we're not going to be in government, so we may as well promise whatever.
The Princess of Wales returned to the public eye with an appearance at Trooping the Colour. Yay!
The world's biggest and smelliest plant burst into bloom at London's Kew Gardens. The corpse flower stinks like rotting flesh and emerges only once every 2 years. So like Boris Johnson, but harder working.
Vladimir Putin visited North Korea looking for weapons trade and copies of Kim Jong-un's favourite magazine, Popular Famine Weekly.
The Reform Party gave $144,000 to Boris Johnson's old faith advisor for candidate vetting that never happened. Richard Tice only realised this at the last minute when Nigel Farage slipped through the net.
Sunak said Badger Culls would continue under a Tory government, added, we've screwed everything else, why should we let those stripy fuckers off?
The long wait to hear who the media giants are supporting in the election is finally over, with the news that the Daily Express is backing a would-be dictator with a bin for a head. Oh, and the Daily Star is backing Count Binface.
Boris Johnson put his shoulder to the campaign wheel by letting CCHQ use his name in letters and doing a couple of selfie videos. Boris Johnson put his shoulder to the campaign wheel by letting CCHQ use his name in some letters and doing a couple of selfie videos while holidaying in Sardinia.
Ed Davey was caught on camera saying the government doesn't know where its arsehole is. As we just mentioned, the answer is holidaying in Sardinia.
Nobody's going to the 60-second Olympics again this week.
Go on.
1 minute 20.
Yes, well done.
Today is exactly 2 weeks from the general election. Parties have published their manifestos, limited companies have shown us their contracts, the first few postal votes have started flowing in under Laura Kunsberg's watchful eye. The election looks set to mark the utter humiliation of either the Tory party or of the polling industry. Sunak disappears for days, then does as little as permissible with as much disdain as possible. Sometimes I think I catch him visibly mouthing 14 sleeps to California. Starmer has almost reached the other side of that polished floor, with his Ming vase completely intact but having smashed everything else of value along the way. And Farage, like a crocodile visible only by his eyes poking above the mud, seems to finally have the thirsty, exhausted Tory antelope within reach of his grotesque jaws.
That is such a vile image.
Naomi, voter registration is now closed. How did it do this year?
Well, a record number of, I don't want to do a Priti Patel here, 629,875 people registered to vote yesterday. And that's the highest amount in a single day ever. And that is putting the current total on 2.89 million people having registered to vote since the general election was called on May the 22nd. Now, we're not going to know how many of those are people re-registering who didn't really need to until the full list is published by the Electoral Commission in a while. But what is really interesting, and we have to give a massive shout out to the campaign Given X, was the number of young people that they got to actually register in the last couple of weeks. They did a great collab with Tinder and various other big brands. And of those who registered, nearly 800,000 were under 25 and 900,000 were aged 25 to 34. So
That's
1.6 million relatively young people registered to vote.
That's wonderful.
It is. They did really, really well.
So that kind of campaigning does work, which is quite uplifting. Jim, as the pollster, save some unforeseen disaster. I mean, there's always a variant that you can't predict, but is there anything that any party can do now in terms of policy to just change the trajectory of this election completely? Or is 2 weeks out from it basically too late to turn this around?
It's never too late to screw up.
Yeah.
Unless you've already done it.
Exactly. Generally, policies don't shift the dial much throughout a campaign. If you look at how parties poll before and after manifestos released, it's kind of the same. With that one exception in 2017.
Theresa May's.
The dementia tax. Very clear drop in the polling for the Conservatives there. I think we were on 18 points before the manifesto and I think it was 7 or so points afterwards. It was a dramatic fall over that week and a half or so. So you definitely can screw up. But with not much time to go, manifestos already released for the two main parties, probably not.
I was having a chat to Ava Santina a few days ago, who goes out basically and just chats to a lot of people in the street for Politics Joe. And she was saying that, annoyingly, the one thing that keeps coming back is that Tory attack, £2,000
It does.
Tory attack, that despite it being just utter shite, it's had real cut through. Are you finding that when you talk to groups?
Yeah, we do focus groups across the country most days now during the campaign. And that is one of the things that, but it's less the 2,000 number specifically and more the general impression, the kind of general scepticism that people still have of Labour. I mean, been out of power for 14 years, but that impression still lasts. So that's one thing that's really come through quite clearly, is people concerned about taxes going up under Labour. To be fair, they also expect taxes to increase under the Conservatives. So that's the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
And when you poll on it as well, you find people, when you kind of ask people, what do you expect for the new government, whichever party it is, and under both parties, people expect taxes to rise.
She's Ava Santina on Twitter. Her real name is Ava Evans, in case you didn't know, Alex.
I didn't know.
She's right. So I've
Do you
been-
just dox her, or is this something that is known? Sorry.
It is known. It is known. I have been campaigning all over the country in rural seats, urban seats, left behind seaside towns, and the 2000 thing has cut through. And what really struck me yesterday when I was in a left behind seaside town was I canvassed probably some of the least well physically and mentally and most deprived people I've ever canvassed. And some of them were bringing up £2,000, and these are people who probably don't pay much tax. Obviously, everyone pays taxes, everyone pays VAT and blah, blah. But these are people for whom, even if that were true, it wouldn't affect them, saying, no, I've got to stick with the Tories because I can't risk being even poorer under Labour. So it had cut through with some voters more than I was expecting. And also supermajority seems to be
that's
cutting
the other
through.
thing that's
Let's talk about that. I mean, we all know there is no such thing as a supermajority in the UK.
Not in the UK, no.
Henry, how do you think it's suddenly become a thing? Who was the kind of champion for getting that going viral?
I don't know. I mean, it's a phrase I've heard coming up a lot recently, but like you say, it's a supermajority is just a majority. It's not. It doesn't. It's. I don't know. Do people see it as a negative thing?
So the Tory attack line is very much, look, they're going to win, but don't let them win big, because if they've got a supermajority, they will be able to do all of these things unfettered. We have a system, a parliamentary system, that means as long as you've got a majority of the MPs, you're going to get everything through pretty much.
I think it was Shapps that's in the back of my head. I seem to remember Grant Shapps.
One of the iterations of Grant Shapps.
Yes.
With the real Grant
He's
Shapps,
got his own
please stand up.
supermajority in his own house.
One of the personas of the Grant Shapps show.
I think they've all been repeating it since then, though, and it's definitely
Because it's obviously working. It's
the two
the other
things
thing
that they
that's
know
kind
are
of
working
for them.
is 2000 and the supermajority.
So what do you
stuff.
think is working for Labour? Like, looking around, what bit of the Labour message do you think has had similarly?
I can't speak nationally or in a London-centric way, because I'm out in West Wales, and Labour's success is rooted in there not being the Tories out there, and is also Labour have been in power in Wales for forever. Wales have never voted for a Tory government in any election ever, there's a lot of scepticism about them, and Plaid are sort of surging in certain places.
And what's driven that? So the 20-mile-an-hour thing?
Well, the 20-mile-an-hour thing is been driven from people across the border, like sort of astroturfing people coming over and causing mischief. Someone pulled out the speed signs in my village, I have to say.
Oh, really?
Very upset about that, because we were very excited about our 20-mile-an-hour zone with the kids playing outside in the street and things like that. But
they hadn't come just from over the border.
No.
That's a long way to go.
That's new colonialism, isn't it, if they've done that? No, the 20-mile-an-hour thing is there. It's farming. It's all farming where I am, and farmers have been neglected both in Westminster and by Labour in Wales and by Brexit. But then there's a biodiversity collapse, which farmers could be helping address is a nice way of putting it. But these are the issues where I am. But this sort of the Westminster bubble stuff, like...
What about the Vaughan Gething scandal in Cardiff? Because when I went to, albeit not a proper Welsh seat, but one just over the border, that was coming up. And I couldn't figure out what one lady was talking about when I knocked on her door. She said, we should have given the money back. He should have given the money back. Keir Starmer should have given the money back. And I was thinking, she means Vaughan Gething.
Well, so
it's gone to Starmer.
It's gone the coffers. It's gone into Labour's coffers. Welsh Labour identifies as Welsh Labour, but it is Labour. It's just a way of sort of standing up to Plaid by pretending that there's a difference. But yeah, he's taken £200,000 off a criminal and kept it and used it to campaign with, and his administration has immediately broken down. He's failed a vote of no confidence, and this is big news in Wales. And I was watching I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, a Labour MP getting interviewed about it yesterday, who was completely dismissive of it and said people don't care, and people across the border don't care, but people in Wales do. It's insulting. They're not paying any attention because they know the votes are safe. And I think further down the line, it could be causing problems for them because I'm feeling a shift to nationalism. Feeling isn't very useful to
in Wales.
Yeah, certainly where I am, we've got a Plaid MP who's going to win the seat, and over in Ceredigion, Ben Lake's going to get a massive majority. It's a different political world that I'm now living in, and Labour I think they need to be careful with how they approach somewhere like Wales.
The other thing that has captured the headlines this week is the reform sort of vetting fiasco, which came at quite an inopportune moment, I would say, just as they were standing there saying, we can manage the country's finances much better and save everyone loads of money just by not being bad at it. And it emerges that they've paid a huge amount of money to this company.
£144,000.
That did no vetting. So it's not clear to me, were they meant to do the vetting and they didn't do it, or was it just literally a pass to the software?
I think it was a pass to, it's like a sort of a Serco sort of outsourcing thing where they don't even do anything and then they get you to do all the work that you've just paid them to do. Deborah Meaden, I saw, did a lovely tweet saying, saying you gave them £144,000 up front without vetting what they were doing. It was, quite... I mean, the comic timing is excellent. Maybe these are sort of performance artists, so it was very funny.
I can see that it is funny. Of course I can. I'm not without, being able to poke fun at Reform UK. But isn't it just them blaming people again for their mistakes? It's them all over. Never us. We're never to blame. We did nothing wrong. In fact, we're going to sue these awful people for cocking up when it was actually us that didn't read the small print, and kind of pretending that they're not a welcoming environment for racists and fascists. I sort of feel like it's really dangerous. When we've seen
it's outsourcing moral judgment.
Absolutely,
is what it's doing. It's saying it's not our fault that 41 of them are mates with an actual fascist on Facebook.
I mean, what is it about the Reform Party that acts as a magnet? He even
claimed it was a stitch-up.
Yeah, it gets to the nub of the situation, doesn't it? That, like you say, they immediately just said it's their fault, not ours. Like, they blame, it's like they're scapegoating people. Yeah. Who could imagine it?
Indeed.
Boris Johnson resurfaced this week as well.
He looked like he'd resurfaced.
I know. I mean... He looked like a man with sort of severe hay fever that was just dipped head first into a vat of pollen. It is interesting that he's endorsing only individual candidates. He's writing loads of pieces in the Daily Mail where he's going, Labour, boo, and he's endorsing some individual candidates with videos. But I don't think he said Rishi Sunak, yay, at all. What do you make of that, Jim?
It's difficult. It's
It's not difficult. It's difficult to say it diplomatically, but
that's what I meant. Yeah, I think the impact of Boris Johnson's endorsement is probably not going to shift the dial very much, especially given that it's only targeted at a few individuals rather than the party generally, or Sunak personally. But that said, in focus groups, we do sometimes hear people speak a bit wistfully of Boris Johnson. I know that there's a kind of that distance between now and the time, but people's attitudes do soften and are softening quite quickly.
Yeah.
We've always said that Tory voters tend to forgive a Tory cock up quite quickly, whereas Labour voters will hold that grudge to the grave if their leaders wrong them somehow. So I think, the Partygate scandal, and which is 4-year anniversary today, as we record,
it's his
actually.
birthday.
Yeah.
It's his birthday, isn't it?
It'd been ambushed with cake all those years ago. And then the various other crises that followed for Johnson do get forgotten much more quickly than, say, Jeremy Corbyn's or Blair's or whomever's would be. I found a really interesting feature on the campaign trail this time round, which I haven't, because I don't tend to get involved much with by-elections and local elections, but since the last general election, is the arrival of the Ring doorbell. And one conversation I had with somebody through the Ring doorbell for about 5 minutes about whether they could be persuaded over to the tactical vote recommended candidate I was there on behalf of, going on for 5 minutes and blah, blah, blah. And then I sort of said, why don't you come to the door and I can give you a poster. He was, I'm in Hampstead. I was in Wales. Then there's been... So if you go canvassing in the daytime in an area with high levels of employment, there's not many people home because they're at work. There are a few people working from home who may be on a Zoom call or whatever and sort of ask you to go away. And then there are the people that come to the door, scantily clad, and they say things like, sorry, I'm in the middle of filming at the moment. And they're obviously OnlyFans workers. And they're that's the only thing
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. Should I put you down as a probable? And yeah, the Ring doorbell, I think, is you can really tell that there is somebody home, but they can see who you are and they're like, not a chance. But that's been quite fascinating. Wasn't there a case of somebody, I can't remember which party it was, he started to canvass with an Amazon box that he holds over the camera so that people will come to the door, and then it's like, surprise!
Oh my
I'm
God,
actually here on behalf of the X party.
Brilliant.
I know.
That's superb. Okay, let's wrap this section up. There was one more question I wanted to ask before we take a couple of questions from listeners, and that was businesses. They've made a big beeline for Labour. They have been for some time, but this week it really was quite notable. Is there a point at which this becomes worrying, at which, as a progressive, you begin to think, I'm not entirely comfortable with these people having that much influence? Or does that reflect just my binary thinking that, if that person likes Labour, then it must be that I'm about to get screwed?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? I think it could telegraph that we're going to have some growth and that business is excited about working with Labour, but also, I guess, lobbying goes on all the time, doesn't it? So they'll have the ear of whoever is in power, and they will want the ear of whoever's in power. So it makes sense that whoever the next people in are, they're gonna want to butter them up. As a progressive, I don't know. I feel like we need to have a dramatic overhaul of how politics works with a view to the climate crisis and how sympathetic we are to big business.
Do you know, Henry, that is something that I found really interesting, though, because a few of the biggest ones came over to Labour because they were pissed off at the Conservatives taking
rowing
their eye
back
off
on
the
net zero.
climate
Yeah,
stuff.
It's cheaper to go net zero quicker than it is to do it slowly and stop. And businesses, the National Grid knows this, the International Energy Agency knows this, and businesses know that. So yeah.
So that's what I meant. Sometimes it's counterintuitive to think that my goals might actually align with these big companies, 100%. But occasionally they just do.
And Jim, I often obviously am in the world of thinking about tactical voters, and this time round there will be tactical former Tory voters. To what extent does the recommendation of big business to a particular party sway that kind of cohort of maybe more Cameronite voter, do you think, if at all?
It's very difficult to say. I think what it's doing is communicating a vibe, and that vibe is kind of safety and stability. That it's okay to vote for this version of Labour. And I think the difference really is marking them. It's distinguishing them from the Corbyn era. I think that's very important. And you can see with the number of people who are formerly Conservative the last election now intending to vote Labour. If you scale that up nationally, Labour are looking to gain something like 2 million votes on their last performance, and most of those are going to be formerly Conservative voters.
You are quite unique, I think, actually, in doing so very consistently. You do both qualitative and quantitative. Always you do focus groups kind of supplemented. And I think other people do them occasionally, but you do them as a matter of principle, like all the time. Do you find there is a difference between what the data is showing and what you're actually getting in the groups? Is there
do people answer a survey differently to the way they answer in a focus group?
Yes, particularly on policy issues. So this is, I think, was what maybe Blair was saying a few years ago about the difference between a 3-second conversation and a 3-minute conversation with voters. And in a poll, people will spend a few seconds answering the question. There's a few seconds to read it, a few to kind of give it a think. What do I what do I reckon? And then click the answer they want. In a focus group, you can have it's an hour and a quarter discussion on a range of issues, but say on policies like national service, say, or GB energy. The instinctive reaction is, sounds great. Next question. But when you have a longer discussion, people are like, well, what's it actually going to cost to set up GB Energy? How much is it going to save me really? Am I going to pay taxes towards this? Are they going to deliver it? I mean, do they have any track record on delivering these sort of things? These are the kind of questions that voters think about in a longer form discussion, which is why it's so important to have these conversations on the regular and be able to drill down into why people think certain things. And often you find it's not just finding out why they think certain things, but also their opinion may shift over the course of the discussion.
And they influence each other as well, don't they?
Yeah. People bounce off each other. They have. Do
you ever have focus groups where people are completely different to how they started?
There's less of that. Less kind of complete reversals. But there are. Yeah. People do make up their minds on the spot. Yeah. Or decide what they think throughout the conversation.
Listener Patrick emailed in to say he loves the new podcast. Thanks, Patrick. And he asks this: please can Naomi explain the rationale for recommending Labour in Scottish seats where the Tories cannot win? This has led some people to claim that Best for Britain is shilling for Labour. I think that one's for you, Naomi.
Thank you. And it is a good question. And first off, there can be no denying that the SNP has been very good at championing pro-Europeanism and criticising the absolute disaster that Brexit is. Yeah. And we are recommending the SNP in Tory SNP facing seats. I don't run Stop the Tories. I run a pro-European organisation that wants a closer relationship with Europe. And I want the next Parliamentary Labour Party to have as many MPs in it who represent the strongest Remain voting nation in the UK, putting pressure on their own government from within it. So that is why that judgment call was made. We are not forcing people to vote a certain way. We are merely one of many tactical vote sites that are saying, here's what we believe in, and on the basis of that, here's how we would vote if we lived where you do.
And now to a related question. Listener Nick asks whether Reform's pro-PR stance is a silver lining of its rise. Joanna from Australia, thanks for listening, Joanna, writes to say that she's vexed by the fact electoral reform is only ever focused on PR, and she would say a preferential vote system, so that allocates first preference, second preference, set, is much better. She says that Farage is the perfect example of the sort of politician who wins from PR, and asks us, is that what you want more of? I mean, no, is the short answer. But what do you think of the intricacies? It's a very, very common myth, I would say, about proportionate systems. I think when she says preferential vote system, she must mean alternate vote. Yeah. And that is used in some Australian elections and was the system that the UK had a referendum on in 2011. It is not proportionate. Voters in the UK rejected it, both because those that wanted PR said this is not a proportionate system, and those that like the status quo weren't going to go for anything different. What we can do, I think it's really helpful, is look at recent elections in Europe where PR has saved Europe from the far right. Le Monde tweeted a map of what would have happened in France last month if their elections were held under first past the post. We'll include it in the show notes, and it would have been an absolute landslide for Rassemblement National, taking 90% of the seats on just 31% of the vote. Wow. That is the same with the PVV in the Netherlands, and in Italy it is the first past the post part of the hybrid system they have in Italy that delivered most of Meloni's seats. So PR is both proportionate and preferential and gives us both, and that's why I argue for it. But others may have other views.
I mean, you can see it in Scotland too. If you look at the general election 2015, SNP won half the vote, and besides maybe 2 or 3, all of the seats in Scotland.
So call to action. I mean, we cannot finish without asking people to do something about it.
You're doing this one, aren't you?
Well, I am, but also I feel I can't really plug Get Voting any more than I already am. So I'm not going to plug the site as so much the posters. So if you want to download a poster and put it up in your window saying things like, I'm I'm usually a Green voter, this time I'm voting Lib Dem, you can put that up, etc. We'll leave the links to all of the different parties' posters. And it does matter if you're in a marginal seat. Things like displaying something in a window has such an enormous impact in normalising a vote for a different party in your area.
Very good. Now, troll with it. A regular feature where we highlight the most delicious bits of trolling that we've received. You've got a good one, don't you?
Well, look, this week has been pretty full on that front, shall we say. So much so that actually I'm not seeing 90% of it because I've got filters on Twitter and I've got other people checking emails and things like that, but it's been bad. But the funniest one that I found came to info@bestforbritain.org, where we told them about the election happening, and here's where you can get information about the election directly to me. Why vote? I don't consent to being governed or need to be. I do not give away my power. I am sovereignty. Thank you, emoji.
Okay.
Is that Mike Francois?
It sounds like that.
It was Francois M990.
You knew Charlotte was going to come up. She's not a troll. I don't want to classify Charlotte as a troll. She's just a very persistent...
Communicator,
yes.
She's your pen pal.
She emails me very regularly, has done for some years now, with suggestions and news of her Brexit pub hopping group that she meets on a weekly basis and tries to convince me how wonderful Boris Johnson is and stuff like that. And she's lovely and very polite. I don't classify her as a troll. And she wrote to me again yesterday to say that she had decided to stick with the Conservatives because Brexit, for better or worse, is her vote guiding lodestar in this election still.
What a line.
And she explained it like this. Most credible newspaper pundits, rock star economists, and the smartest celebrities still support Brexit. Just like it often takes time when you suddenly leave a restaurant in search of a better meal to find an alternative eatery, so it will be with Brexit. We will be dining out on Brexit for centuries.
Wow.
So,
Sorry,
is she suddenly leaving restaurants?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, how many people actually suddenly leave restaurants?
Also, it's been 7 years and I'm quite hungry now.
Yeah.
So that's from Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm sure you will feature regularly. And John Llewellyn wrote in to say, rather less charmingly, another fucking wanker. I wish people would stop using this as a political platform. Fuck off and get a life. I will be campaigning for reform. Farage rules.
Oh. But not on this platform.
But not
it's not for politics.
I like that juxtaposition.
When I revealed my identity, when I said I wasn't a Secret Tory anymore,
we could do a whole special, right?
I said I was Henry Morris. My favourite bit of trolling was Lee Anderson saying I look like the Tiger King.
Fair point.
But also some people were saying, this guy can't be a politician, he's got a mullet. And someone piped up in all the comments underneath saying, no, to be fair, he does look like the politician. He just looks like the mayor of a small Australian suburb.
Well, I'll be your Carol Baskin, Henry Hilbert.
Lovely.
Thanks, Alex. Listeners, if you want to get in touch with our complaints department, you can do so via quietriotpod@gmail.com. Quiet. Next up, we're talking alternate reality. Everyone knows how badly the Tory campaign is going, but we thought it might be fun to consider if it could have all just been a bit different, a sliding doors kind of moment. How much of the current Tory malaise lies with Sunak rather than, say, Cameron, Johnson, or even Truss? How much is down to how he's run the campaign versus the things that he did or maybe didn't do after gaining the leadership? Should he have cut taxes? Should he have sacked Braverman? Or was the writing already firmly on the wall? Jim, more in common track stuff like this, like absolute hawks. When did the rot set in to the Tory party lack of poll lead?
If you look at the fundamentals, it was bad a year and a half ago. And a lot of that was due less on kind of policy and competence at that stage. This was kind of the end of Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister. And it was more about trust in politics, the sense that you couldn't trust politicians. They were all out for themselves, didn't respect ordinary people. That was very clear back then. And then we had a bunch of policy errors that compounded upon that and made it not just a trust issue, but also a competency issue.
So remind listeners of what
Not
those
just
kinds
a
of
trust issue, but also a trust issue.
Well, indeed, yeah. So what were those sort of policy moments that sank?
I mean, it's mostly around the mini budget. If you look at the polling, it's very, very clear. You see a huge spike in Labour votes the week after that happens.
Yeah.
And it just kind of doesn't come down from there. It shoots up and stays high.
It's the economy, stupid.
Yes, in that sense, yeah, very much so.
Okay, but let's say Rishi Sunak has inherited all of that, right? There's nothing he can do about that past. Let's go to the point where he takes over. Was there a point in his tenure where things had started to move in a positive way, as it were, that might have been sort of a risky call, but less risky than it turned out?
Yeah, there is maybe an alternate reality where it kind of works. If you look at some of the polling from early on in his time, he's just become Prime Minister, and there's a lot of talk about running a kind of presidential campaign at the next election. That was based on his personal popularity being a lot higher than the party. And that was particularly true amongst the kind of millennial generation, people in their late 30s, very few of whom intended to vote Conservative. Maybe at that point 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 even. But almost half quite liked Sunak as a person, kind of respected his time as Chancellor, and could have felt like they could kind of relate to him in a sense. And if you look at those kind of voters, they are exactly the kind of voters that were lost as a result of the realignment post-Brexit, that kind of thing. These are people who, yes, in their late 30s...
They didn't mind a bit of eat out to help out, did they? Because they could afford it.
Exactly,
They
live in city centres.
Yeah.
Now it's eat now to help out, which I think was your joke, wasn't it?
I think that gets the question, is there anything he could do differently? I think in any situation with him at the helm, the situation will become people get to know more about him. And as that happens, whatever he's done, they're not going to like him. I was almost feeling sorry for him today. His gaff-prone campaign, mistake after mistake, leaving D-Day early. And then there was a video yesterday of him talking to some sheep, and the sheep all ran off. And everyone was saying, which advisor let him do that? And then this morning he said he ate a Twix and Haribo, and people were laying into him for that. And the confirmation bias of this man is useless at everything. He can't even now say he eats a Twix without people turning on him, which is a consequence of his own deficiencies.
But don't you think that's a function of the, let's say diplomatically, the slightly overconfidence that, some private schools build into people to think that I am the best at everything.
That's what you're paying for at private school.
That then suddenly, they find themselves with the opposite of imposter syndrome, basically, in a position where they think, oh shit, not everyone thinks I'm brilliant.
And it's not like he's up against Mr. Charisma.
No.
Exactly.
So to dislike him so vehemently.
Sir Charisma to you.
Yeah. I don't believe
this morning he was
baubles.
he was speaking to someone on the radio about who was telling him their plight about having to use food banks, and Nick Ferrari lobbed a question, basically railroaded him into talking about his own background straight away, and he then regurgitated the line his advisors have obviously told him to say, which is, I'm not going to apologise for my upbringing. But he did it directly after this person had been talking about
response
food banks.
almost to this person talking about food banks.
He doesn't know what he's doing.
He said, and then he added, I'm not going to apologise Obviously,
For being
I've been
so much
privileged.
richer than Yao.
I'm not going to apologise for that. My parents worked really hard. That's the bit
Which means
he's getting
your parents did
mullered
not.
over. Yes,
Yeah.
which absolutely
It's
is
the killer, isn't it?
saying, if you're poor, your mother is a lazy bitch, basically.
Yeah.
That's the implication.
What about the rest of the cabinet? So he famously made Cameron a peer in order to put him in cabinet as foreign sec and try and save his bacon, oink oink. Did that help or hurt Jim? Like, was Cameron popular enough to give him a little bit of a bounce? Should he have done more of that? Should he have got rid of Braverman? How do these other figures go down with the public?
On Cameron, it seems like it hasn't made a difference. Like, there's been no shift in the polls.
Didn't
as a
win
result
back
of
any
that.
any like,
Doesn't
Lib
seem to
Dem-y
have done.
kind
If
of
you look at the
voters,
kind
or-
of seats where the Lib Dems are kind of likely going to win at the next election, those are the exact kind of seats that were like Cameron heartlands.
Yeah.
It seems not to have helped at all. The tricky thing was trying to do two things at once, trying to be reassuring and kind of stick with the plan messaging. You can't do that and also be a change candidate following Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. And so those two things were confused and worked against each other, so that now you've managed to kind of achieve neither.
Yeah, that was roundabout conference time, wasn't it? Where he went to the country with this really confused, everyone before me has failed. I am the change candidate. And it's like, what? You see, in my imagination, there does exist a moment, just instinctively, and I was arguing for that, but who listens to me? I was saying,
Not me.
basically, late spring 2023, he had announced his goals. There had been some very positive movement in inflation. He had just signed the Windsor framework. He was kind of on a high. He was sort of the man who could get things done where others had failed. And I just think if before the point when more boats started crossing that summer, you had gone to the country with, this is my plan, you see it's beginning to work, but I need more time, I think there may have been a situation where he was vaguely competitive.
Or certainly where they wouldn't be reduced to potentially sub 100 MPs.
Yeah. But the moment I think he wore that Rwanda millstone round his neck and accepted that this was going to be the big issue in this election, that he was going to somehow out-reform, I think that was...
It was crackers, wasn't it? It's an
that was
unresolvable situation
Yeah.
on the terms that it's being pitched at. And to decide to go out to bat on that pitch is insane.
So, Alex, do we have a call to action for listeners? We can't wind back the clock and tell Sunak to have done something differently, nor would I suspect most of our listeners want us to do. But what
I
can
do have a call to action. You lolled at me when I suggested it, but I mean it entirely seriously. So I just joined the Conservatives this morning.
Yes, an exclusive. You have heard it
It's
here
three-
first. Sturdy
again.
Alex is now
It's
a member of the
£3
Conservative Party.
It's £3.50 a month. And basically, if you are going to participate in the next selection of the next Conservative leader, I think now is about the last moment you could go, because you have to have been a member for 3 months, I think, to be able to vote. And I think that's about right, because you're not really boosting their election coffers either. That money won't go through instantly to them campaigning. But I genuinely, and I do feel this really profoundly, I think we live in a country with a system that means we will all spend our lives, a considerable portion of our lives, under a Conservative government. And we should take a really active interest in the health of that other big party and really basically try and stand united with a slightly more reasonable and moderate Tories who will have a massive fight in their hands come next autumn to not go down the really populist thing. Henry's looking at me.
I was going to say, has he persuaded you, Henry?
No. I didn't get past the first bit. But who would...
3 months, a tenner for 3 months.
Who are you going to vote
get a
for?
say.
Who do you think will survive?
I don't know, 'cause
who do
I
you think
don't
will
know.
survive to fight it out?
I genuinely don't know. But
Okay,
what I do know is that of whatever two options come to the membership, there will be one that is slightly less bad than the other one, and I would quite like to participate in choosing that one.
They don't even let me go to their conference. So if their vetting system is even a smidge better than Reform UK's, I don't know that you're going to actually get that membership card through the post.
You're looking very quiet and sheepish right now.
I think it would be odd to deliberately disenfranchise yourself when you could spend a couple of quid and potentially choose the Prime Minister in the late 2020s.
There you go.
There you go.
Suck it, Morris.
I'll keep my £3.50, thank you.
Now, we've already teased you with it, but Henry's new Lost Shakespeare play is available to pre-order now. Henry, why this, why now, and why in this format?
Lots of great questions. I love Shakespeare. He speaks to us across the centuries. I dislike the Tories. But the subject matter of the last 14 years is tragedian, and it's the sort of thing Shakespeare could have easily tackled himself in one of his history plays. And so I've overlaid a 5-act Shakespearean structure over the last 14 years, from 5 acts for 5 prime ministers.
Wow.
Cameron, May, obviously Johnson, Truss, Sunak, and written it largely in verse, which was the hardest thing I've ever taught myself to do to start with, and remained like that for several months. And then suddenly the haze sort of cleared a bit, and I realised what I was doing and how to do it, and had to go right back to the beginning.
You're basically now fluent in Shakespeare.
In iambic pentameter. It's mad, some of the rules that you don't know you use in everyday speech. So you're stressing in a 2-syllable noun, you'd stress the second syllable, but in the second syllable in a 2-syllable verb, you'd stress the first syllable. I didn't know that.
I mean, how do you even get someone to edit that? I mean,
I send it to the publisher, and I said,
your problem.
I said very timidly, you might want to get someone who knows a bit about Jacobean tragedy to look at this, because I sure as hell don't. But it's been absolutely, once I worked out how the scaffold works and how to do it, it was quite liberating, because you're stuck with the finite amount to say in each speech. So instead of like waffling on or going too short, you're constrained within parameters, so you work within those. And then there's 20% of the plays in prose, and that's the Red Wall, Tory MPs, who are the rude mechanicals going about putting on their play within a play. Yeah, it
sounds incredible.
It really is incredible.
Look, listeners, don't just take my word for it. Alex is going to read you a short excerpt and set the scene for us. Please go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I chose the monologue of Liz Truss at her All Is Gone moment, because on the basis that actors like to do stuff they never get a chance to do in real life, and so always go for the casting you're never ever going to get. And you can tell us what happens just before that, and maybe even read me into it.
I don't have a script in front of me.
I'll show
we
you
had
just one line.
Liz Truss is with the last of her co-Tories. She's with Therese Coffey and Simon Clarke in a parody of Antony and Cleopatra, and she's on her way out, and she knows it, and she's just in Antony and Cleopatra, an apothecary brings a snake for Cleopatra to kill herself, and in this version she calls Michael Fabricant with the worm of Lichfield, which bites her and gives her amnesiac properties, so she can go off and go to CPAC and go and be a fascist in America. I think Alex is about to read the moment when one of the many moments where she's complaining about how the whole world is against her.
You can read Simon Clarke.
So I think Therese Coffey says, "But hark thee, Simon Clarke." And Simon Clarke says, "Good Liz, let me entreat you."
No, Simon. What a wounding shame is this the anti-growth coalition have caused. Now daring our honour, the communist stockbrokers, bankers and traders in guilt do reject the trickling down of our most wonderful non-dom capitalist juice. The tofu-stained Linekerist mob who think that paying £700 more on their mortgage too great a price to ease the load on our poor billionaires. Make me U-turn, my 45p cut. Then demand they me my P45. Addition of their envy. See, smoggy stilts, if you had tanked the markets as a man, you would not have then lost the confidence of this, our Conservative Party. For women, different these conventions are. We may not market economy's wreck unreproved. Thus I am now, unfolded by conspiracies that will outlive me, which smites me beneath the fall I have.
Enter James Cleverly.
Alex, that was incredible. Henry, pre-order, when's it all out properly?
I just announced it existed on Monday. It's real book on September the 12th, but you can pre-order it now. Go and have a look at my Twitter page. Please do.
And that is the end of the show. A huge thank you to our guest, Jim Blagden.
Thank you very much.
And Henry Morris.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Make sure to follow us on social media at Quiet Riot Pod, or drop us an email with your complaints to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
And if you have time to give us 5 stars or pen a quick review on Apple or Spotify, we'll love you forever, because it'll boost the algorithm and help more people find out about Quiet Riot.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week, or maybe on Sunday. Probably Sunday. Yeah, it'll be Sunday.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and me, Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canalou. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global. See ya!
You can do so on... Who wrote this?
I wrote this, I think.
You can do so at Quiet Riot.
Yeah, I don't like at
Okay.
with email addresses, because then you say
You don't
at.
go on and
Via. Choose a preposition. Just don't say at, because there's an at
Live
in
on
the
air.
address.